Cody and in Jackson, we've got some populations that are declining, some that are increasing, and so the challenges that we face are trying to address harvest strategies and winter range management of these elk because of the changes that we're facing, and I'll try and touch on them as we move through this. As these populations in the elk herds are occurring, our budgets are becoming more constrained, and so the partnerships that we've developed over time with the Forest Service and the refuge have become even more critical. We've also developed some partnerships with some of the local groups, both the outfitters, the Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife, and groups that have a little bit of funding. And I'll touch on some of the radio collar work that we've done with some of that funding that they've gave us. It came from Jackson. Certainly some elk probably did leave Jackson and go there, but undoubtedly it's always been recognized that Jackson Hole has had its own distinct elk population. We had historic die-offs here even before settlement. In the 1880s, 1882, we had a significant die-off in Jackson, and that was 2 years before settlers arrived in Jackson Hole. Went to feed lines in those areas, and so some of the people at the time felt it was a success, that they did contribute to elk numbers that migrated around the Pinedale areas, but a lot of the times those animals did move into feed lines. In fact, there's a story about the game wardens at the time in the 30s flying an airplane and throwing M80s or large cracker shells out the window of the airplane at the elk to get them away from a haystack. They blew the windshield out of the airplane, they threw a cracker out, or a firecracker out, hit the strut, it blew back in on the dash, and blew the windshield out, and so then they lost their aerodynamics and went down. They barely made it to a road where they could put the plane down, but overall it was an attempt to try and get those elk to start moving that way, but in effect it mainly contributed to those elk coming to feed grounds, private feed lines in those areas. 1980, we had over 10,000 ear tag returns from elk in the herd unit, and then in the late 70s, we started putting radio collars on with the refuge, and so we got another 40 years of radio collar data to substantiate where this herd unit really is. So the elk migration that is to the refuge is considered to be the most spectacular of any terrestrial large mammal, and it was so important that in the 40s and 50s, so spectacular that a large amount of controversy surrounding Grand Teton's expansion centered around the management of the migration of elk from Yellowstone National Park. Because of the visible nature of that migration, the Jackson herd, of course, has national significance because of its consumptive and non-consumptive uses. Grand Teton ends up being the bottom of the funnel. If you look at a narrow funnel, Grand Teton ends up having most of the migrations through it, and the refuge ends up being a large melting pot. And so when you go out to sample elk in this area in terms of looking at calf ratios and the numbers of elk, it's already a big mixing of all the elk that came from all the high elevation summer ranges. So it's hard to tell if some of these elk came from Yellowstone, the Teton Wilderness, or Spring Gulch. So along the southern end of the herd unit, we have the Snake River Corridor, and the Snake River Corridor, of course, being from Jenny Lake south, includes the west of the airport and into Spring Gulch. And again, that's based on historical data, historical distribution, and once we have that information, we can develop a population objective for the herd unit. And the current objective for the herd unit is 11,000 elk, and that objective was based on the multi-year analysis that the refuge had conducted for the elk and bison management plan, and as well as once that was done, the Game and Fish Commission went to public meetings, and we further adopted an objective that identified 3,500 in the Grovant, 5,000 elk on the refuge, and the paper kind of had it wrong today. It said something about the Grovant was going to have 6,000 elk. The objective basically says that we'll have 2,500 elk on native ranges outside of the 5,000 elk on the refuge. We start monitoring annual trends, reproduction from these different areas, and we can kind of start develop our hunting season strategies to focus what we want to do in these different areas. So if we look at we broke the herd unit into 3 different geographic areas. The Teton Wilderness and Hunter Area 79, which is in Grand Teton Park, we manage for migratory elk. the Grovant drainage, we managed to increase resident elk populations because of the declining numbers that we've observed there and the low calf ratios. And then on the southern end of the herd unit, again, we got this funnel. We've got all these elk that filter down into area 77. We managed to reduce numbers of southern migratory elk, and again, we're managing towards that 5,000 elk on the refuge. Collaborative monitoring effort through the Jackson Cooperative Elk Studies Group, which is a collaboration of the agencies involved with elk, and that includes Grand Teton Park, the Bridger Teton, the Refuge, and the Wyoming Game and Fish. And then we also coordinate with Yellowstone and the Targhee National Forest during the same time. 10 elk, 4 of those animals you could reasonably expect to go to the Teton Wilderness or Yellowstone Park. And at the same time, they had, if you just figure 10 elk, less than 1 would end up coming into Spring Gulch. So a very small percentage would go to Spring Gulch. Today we've got the exact opposite. We've got, if you collar 10 elk on the refuge, 4 of them are going to go in the area south of Moose. 1 will go to Yellowstone, and then the rest of them are kind of scattered in between. So a huge difference. It kind of causes us quite a bit of a change in management in terms of where we need to have hunting pressure to control elk numbers. 2006 through 2010, I think this was from. SFW, which is Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife, gave us some money to radio collar elk in the summer in Yellowstone Park, and Iowa State radio collared some elk during the winter in the Buffalo Valley. And even though some of these studies that SFW and Safari Club International and the Wyoming Outfitters and Guides Association paid for, it was likely going to result in a change in the hunting season and the opportunity for those people to participate in the hunt. It was still funded by those guys, and I have my hats off to them, because when we got the data, they knew that the hunting season changes were going to affect them directly. We ended up with time periods when they came through the different hunt areas. They used this hunt area 74 pretty extensively. They also crossed through Antelope Flats, and then they used kind of this portion of hunt area 80 east of the refuge. And so I'll highlight a couple of changes that we've made. We shortened elk seasons in area 79 and the Teton Wilderness. We now close on November 6th up here. And then when you get down to hunt area 74, we close that on October 25th. We added that into area 81. And again, that was to provide more protection for these elk that migrated through Shadow Mountain to get to the refuge. And then we also, this year, we closed Antelope Flats on November 6th as well. And again, all that was designed to afford these elk a little more protection as they migrate. East of the refuge, I'm sorry, is the area south of Twin Creek stays out until November 30th. The area north of Twin Creek closes down. And again, it was, our feeling was some of these migratory elk were using that real estate a little more than the southern radio collars on. And those collars will collect the location every hour and a half, and so we can assess what our hunting seasons are doing. The other thing that we'd really like to see is when we shut a hunting season off, we'd like to encourage those elk to stay north and use the wind range that's there instead of coming to the refuge during this time of year, which so far I think Eric would agree we're starting to see a little bit of change in the numbers of elk coming to the refuge, at least early in the season. What they did on this graph is just plotted the wolf home ranges, so you get a sense that some of these elk that are migrating from the arms of Yellowstone Lake, they're going through 2 different wolf packs here, another wolf pack, and then the wolf packs that are in the Moran area, and then before they get to the refuge. So it's a sense of, gives us a sense of what vulnerability these animals have during their migrations. And again, it just emphasizes the need that we have to adjust our hunting seasons to afford these elk a little more protection. Conversely, if you look at the elk that come from Spring Gulch, they're migrating only a few miles to the refuge. They really don't have any other outside additional mortality sources other than maybe some mortalities on the roadways that they have to deal with. And so it's something that we need to consider as management. Basically got 2 years of data on here. The white is from 2009 and the yellow is from 2010 on this side of the slide. If you look at refuge on feed, we had 7,700 on feed. And then in 2009, we had 4,000 at the time of our survey. The big difference being is that in 2010, we were 109% of normal on February 23rd. In 2009, we were at 62% of normal. So huge difference in terms of winter severity. But again, you get a sense of on a mild winter, you can have elk scattered all over on these winter ranges. For example, Buffalo Valley, we had 350. This year at 269. 180 east of the refuge, which is this area right here. In 2009, we had 1,000 elk off a feed at the time of our flights. And this last year, we had 194. Huge difference. A lot more elk moving to find something where they could forage on instead of being on those native ranges. Lower Grovant, so this area around Lower Slide Lake, we had nearly 1,000 elk. Last year we had 300. The main area that we are concerned about is this Buffalo Valley, where we started shutting our hunting seasons off earlier, trying to encourage these elk to stay up in this area instead of coming all the way down. And we're hoping that after a few years, those animals realize that they can stay out on native range and not be pushed off by hunting seasons. The game warden, Bill Long, and I have observed elk during our helicopter flights from 1999 till 2009, and then the red dots are from 2010 where we saw elk. And you can see the Buffalo Valley, we only had a couple places where elk were out, and that's pretty concerning for us because we'd really like to see them start using some of these slopes. The other thing I have on here is the calf ratios, and you can see on the refuge we had 23 calves per 100, Grovant 11 calves per 100, and in the Buffalo Valley 21 calves per 100. And in February we need to have 24 calves per 100 to sustain a population. So refuge is probably, this refuge segment is doing okay. Again, the Grovant is a concern because of the low production, and Buffalo Valley has been kind of marginal for quite a few years. And so we adjust our hunting seasons for those elk that winter in those areas because of that.